He was born into chains, not metaphorical chains, literal iron chains, the property of another human being, with no legal rights, no freedom of movement, and no protection from whatever his owner decided to do to his body. His master, a man named Epaphroditus, broke his leg deliberately. The historical accounts differ on exactly why. Some say as punishment, some say as a demonstration of power, some say simply because he could. Epictetus looked at his master while the leg was being broken and said, "If you keep twisting, you'll break it." His master kept twisting. The leg broke. Epictetus said, "I told you so." And then he built a philosophy of freedom that has outlasted every empire that existed in his lifetime, influenced Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man who ever lived, and is still being read, studied, and applied 20 centuries after a man in chains demonstrated something the free world still struggles to understand, that the only freedom that ultimately matters is the kind no one can take from you. If you want to understand how a man with nothing, no freedom, no rights, no property, no intact body, built the most complete philosophy of inner freedom ever documented, subscribe and hit the bell, because after this video we're covering how a Stoic handles a breakup. No crying, no begging, no waiting for closure that never comes. But first, Epictetus, the freest man in Rome, who was also its most famous slave. We know almost nothing about Epictetus's early life with certainty. He was born around 50 AD in Hierapolis, a city in what is now southwestern Turkey, then part of the Roman province of Phrygia. His name itself is not a proper name. It is the Greek word for acquired or gained, the kind of name given to slaves. Whether he was born into slavery or sold into it as a child is not recorded. What is recorded is that at some point in his early life, he became the property of Epaphroditus, a freedman who had himself been a slave and who served as a secretary to the Emperor Nero. Epaphroditus was apparently a man of some position and considerable cruelty. The story of the broken leg appears in multiple ancient sources, most prominently in Origen's work against Celsus from around 248 AD. And while the specific circumstances vary between accounts, the core of the story, that Epictetus's leg was broken by his master and that Epictetus responded with philosophical calm, is consistent across the sources. The calm was not performance. It was the product of a philosophical position that Epictetus had already developed, even as a slave, about what was and wasn't his to control. What Epictetus had already understood, before anyone taught it to him formally, was the core insight that would become the foundation of all his later philosophy. His body was not his freedom of movement was not his legal status was not his physical safety was not his. None of these things were within his control, and therefore none of them constituted his genuine self. What was his, entirely, absolutely, inalienably his, regardless of what Epictetus did to the rest, was his will, his faculty of judgment, his capacity to choose how to assess what was happening to him and what to want in response to it. Epictetus called this the hegemonikon, the ruling faculty, and he spent the rest of his long life after his eventual freedom teaching that this faculty is the only thing that is truly yours, that it cannot be enslaved, that it cannot be broken, and that the entire project of a human life is simply learning to use it correctly. Epictetus was freed sometime during or after Nero's reign, which ended with Nero's death in 68 AD. The exact circumstances of his manumission are not recorded, but it is known that after his freedom he began studying philosophy, likely under the Stoic teacher Musonius Rufus, one of the most rigorous and demanding Stoic philosophers of the 1st century AD, whose own lectures survive as fragments and who taught that philosophy without practice is merely entertainment. Musonius was a formative influence, and the emphasis on practice over theory, on the lived demonstration of philosophical principles rather than their academic analysis, became the defining feature of Epictetus's own teaching. He taught in Rome for some years before being expelled from the city by the Emperor Domitian in 89 AD as part of a broader expulsion of philosophers. He relocated to Nicopolis, a city in northwestern Greece, where he founded a school and taught for the rest of his life. He never wrote anything. Every word of his that survives was written down by his student Arrian. of Nicomedia, who attended his lectures in Nicopolis around 108 AD and recorded them in 2 works, the Discourses, of which 4 of the original 8 books survive, and the Enchiridion, a compressed handbook of Stoic practice that Arrian compiled from the Discourses for easier practical use. This matters for understanding Epictetus, because what we have is not his carefully composed written arguments, it is the record of a teacher speaking to students in real time, responding to their specific confusions, their specific failures, their specific resistances. The voice in the Discourses is direct, often sharp, sometimes impatient, always practical. He is not constructing a philosophical system, he is trying to get a room full of people to actually change how they live. The difference between those 2 projects is enormous, and it explains why Epictetus's work has a quality that much ancient philosophy lacks, the sense of genuine urgency of a man who has personally tested every principle he teaches under conditions that would have broken most people. The central teaching of Epictetus is the dichotomy of control, the absolute, fundamental division of everything in the world into 2 categories, things within your power and things not within your power. He states this division at the very beginning of the Enchiridion, in the first sentence of the first chapter, because he considered it the necessary starting point for everything else. Within your power, your judgments, your impulses toward action, your desires, your aversions, in short, everything that is genuinely your own mental activity. Not within your power, your body, your property, your reputation, your official positions, in short, everything that is not your own mental activity, but depends on external conditions or other people's choices. This division is easy to state. It is very hard to actually live by. Because most human beings spend most of their lives directing their psychological energy toward the second category, trying to control their reputations, their health outcomes, other people's opinions of them, the external circumstances of their lives, while neglecting the first category almost entirely. Epictetus's point is not just that this is inefficient, it is that this misdirection of energy is the entire source of human unhappiness. If you want something that is not within your power, you will suffer, not because life is cruel, but because the structure of your wanting is guaranteed to produce suffering, regardless of how events unfold. You might get what you want and still be anxious about keeping it. You might not get it and be devastated. Either way, your peace depends on something that was never yours to control. The suffering is structural, not accidental. Epictetus used his own experience as a slave to demonstrate this principle with a precision that his students, most of whom were free Roman citizens of considerable privilege, found both unsettling and impossible to refute. He would point out that Epaphroditus had had complete power over his body. He could be beaten, he could be imprisoned, he could have his leg broken. All of this had happened, and none of it had touched the part of him that was genuinely his will, his judgment, his capacity to assess what was happening and choose his response. Not because he was numb, not because the pain didn't register, but because he had placed his sense of self entirely in the faculty that no one could reach. His master had power over his body. He had power over everything that mattered. And power over everything that matters, Epictetus argued, is what freedom actually is, not the political and legal status, not the ability to move freely through a city, not the absence of chains. Those are preferred conditions like health and wealth. They are better to have than not have, but they are not freedom in the sense that matters philosophically. Freedom in the sense that matters is the condition of a will that is not enslaved to external things, not to the desire for approval, not to the fear of loss, not to the need for comfort, and that is available to any human being in any external circumstance, including chains. This is why Epictetus said and meant literally that he had been freer than Caesar. He was not performing philosophical bravado, he was making a precise claim. The Emperor of Rome, whatever his political power, was enslaved by his desires, his fears, his need for external validation, his attachment to outcomes that were not entirely within his control. A man who needs the approval of the Senate, who fears the loss of power, who is tormented by the possibility of assassination or political failure, that man is not free, regardless of how many people he controls. Epictetus, having located his entire self in the one faculty that no one could reach, was in the genuine philosophical sense freer than any person whose peace depended on external conditions remaining favorable. He had nothing to lose that was genuinely his. And a person with nothing to lose that is genuinely theirs cannot be coerced, cannot be threatened, cannot be broken by any external power. This is not a comfortable position for the powerful to hear, which is partly why Domitian expelled the philosophers. A philosophy that teaches that political and economic power have no genuine authority over the only thing that matters is a philosophy that is structurally threatening to every system of control that relies on people believing otherwise. The influence of Epictetus on Marcus Aurelius is one of the most consequential philosophical transmissions in history. Junius Rusticus, Marcus's teacher and a man who had personally known Epictetus's circle, introduced the young Marcus to the Discourses around 145 AD. Marcus records in Meditations, written 3 decades later, that he is grateful to Rusticus above almost anyone else for this introduction, for bringing him into contact with a philosophy that was not merely intellectually interesting, but that he could actually use. The specific things Marcus absorbed from Epictetus appear throughout Meditations: the dichotomy of control, the practice of examining judgments rather than accepting them automatically, the concept of the ruling faculty as the genuine self, the morning and evening review as tools for maintaining philosophical alignment. What Epictetus gave Marcus was not new philosophical arguments, but a practical technology for maintaining character under the specific pressures that absolute power generates, and Marcus used that technology, imperfectly but consistently, for 19 years of one of the most demanding reigns in Roman history. Here is what Epictetus's life actually demonstrates and why it matters to you in circumstances that bear no resemblance to literal slavery. The external conditions of your life, whatever they are, however difficult, however unjust, however far from what you would have chosen, do not determine the quality of your character or the freedom of your will. They determine the circumstances in which you exercise your will. And the circumstances in which you exercise your will are, from the Stoic perspective, almost irrelevant to the question of whether you exercise it well. Epictetus exercised his will well in slavery, in poverty, with a broken leg, in exile. The conditions were not favorable. The will was free. That is not an inspiring anecdote. It is a philosophical claim with direct implications for how you understand your own situation. If Epictetus could maintain a free and functioning will in chains, then whatever external conditions you are currently using as reasons why you cannot maintain yours are not the actual obstacle. The actual obstacle is the same one Epictetus identified in his students 2,000 years ago, the belief that external conditions have authority over the thing that is genuinely yours. They do not. They never did. That authority was always imaginary, and Epictetus demonstrated it by living without granting it. If this video changed how you understand the relationship between your external circumstances and your genuine freedom, good, subscribe and hit the bell. Because next week we're covering how a Stoic handles a breakup, the moment when one of the most significant external conditions of your life changes without your consent, and the question is whether your will is genuinely free, or whether it was only free when conditions were favorable. That is the real test, and Epictetus already told you what the answer should look like. See the game, control the game,